kickoff of the final day of what has been a fantastic reunion weekend. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Meredith Reese, a member of the Office of Advancement here, also a proud undergraduate alum myself and former alumni board volunteer. This has just been, I think, an amazing weekend. I hope you all are enjoying the weather and a little heat, at least here down in Rhode Island. I'm more than excited. I was thrilled when I found out Jason and I, for almost a decade that I've been working at Simmons, have worked on a variety of projects. I consider him a fantastic colleague, but more than that, a friend. I'm sure many of you on this session have had the opportunity to work with Jason, and it's just a pure pleasure, both as an alum and as part of staff. So without further ado, I am proud to introduce the University Archivist, Jason Wood, for this session on the history of living and learning at Simmons University. Welcome, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meredith, and you're far too kind. I consider you a wonderful and trusted colleague and friend as well, and I'm so pleased to join everyone this morning. As Meredith mentioned, I am the University Archivist here at Simmons. I am also the Deputy Director of the University Library. In my semi-spare time, I'm an adjunct faculty member in the School of Library and Information Science. I've been at Simmons for almost 20 years now, and I'm a double alum from the graduate programs. I have a degree from the School of Library and Information Science, as well as a degree from the Communications Management program, formerly run out of the School of Business. And it's my pleasure to join you all this morning. I've probably interacted or worked with many of you getting ready for your reunions. I heard that you had very robust and great dinners to reconnect last night, and I'm so pleased to hear that. It certainly is a warm day here in Brighton, Massachusetts, about 3 miles from Simmons campus. But I hope for early Sunday morning that we can make this an engaging and fun session. I have a presentation, as Meredith said, a history of living and learning. I'm going to look at the history of Simmons College, later Simmons University, talk about some of the ways it has realized John Simmons's vision over the generations. And then we'll talk about some other fun aspects of student life and student engagement. And to the point of engagement, if any of you have questions or whatnot about the archives, about Simmons history, please drop them in the chat. Meredith will be keeping an eye on that. And hopefully we can save a few minutes at the end to do some questions and answers, or just general reminiscing. Without further ado, then, let me figure out how to share my screen, because you're here to see old-time Simmons photos, not me. There we go. I hope everyone can see that now. And if not, someone will say so in the chat. So here we go with the history of Simmons University. Let's see. Oh. Is the slides advancing? Yes, okay, I believe so. If not, someone yell at me. I am not too familiar with this platform. So I want to start with just taking a few moments to sort of acknowledge the founder of Simmons University and its founding. I'm sharing with you now a photo of John Simmons. Most of us are familiar with the older portrait of Mr. Simmons. This is obviously a younger John Simmons, and I just like to bring him out for special occasions like reunion. John Simmons was born in 1796 in Rhode Island, so not far from where Meredith is this morning. And he moved to Boston as a young man to join his brother in a tailoring shop in Boston's West End. Mr. Simmons had a wonderful innovation, if you will, and that would have been the concept of the ready-made suit. Before he came along, suits were available in only through a tailoring process, which was extremely time and monetarily a tremendous investment of time and money, rather. Mr. Simmons identified ways to make suits in standardized sizes so you could then buy things off the rack. This innovation made him a very wealthy man, and toward the end of his life, he devoted the bulk of his fortune to the founding of Simmons University. There's a shot of Mr. Simmons, a woodcut from his tailoring office, from his tailoring shop. He donated the bulk of his fortune to the establishment of Simmons Female College, as he framed it in his will, with the express intent of preparing women for an independent livelihood through training in those fields to which would allow them that sort of future opportunities. He identified a number of fields in his will. Telegraphy was one, medicine, music, some of which Simmons later invested in and developed strong programs in, others of which were flights of fancy, if you will, of Mr. Simmons's. He passed away in 1870, and after the Great Fire of Boston destroyed much of his real estate holdings. But once the wealth of the value of his estate had recouped itself, Simmons College was founded in 1899. The first president, Henry Lefevre, worked very closely with the Board of Trustees to establish Simmons College, and the first class entered Simmons in 1902. And they explored academic programs, such as in the early days, there was the School of Science, the School of Household Economics, the School of Secretarial Studies, Library Science, and I'll get to all those in a bit. That's an image of the first seal, which is much more ornate than it is now. So the first class entered in 1902, and in 1906, they held their very first commencement. And this was held at Mount Vernon Church, not far at all from the Back Bay, up on Mass Ave. And this is an example of the first commencement week. And I think the next shot is of the very intrepid first class of Simmons, the class of 1906. There was a mix of students who both received bachelor's degrees. Bachelor of Science was the only degree offered back then, as well as a number of women who were continuing their studies or were getting certifications in special fields. These women went on to be semi-legendary at Simmons, the first class. And we have a wonderful collection in the archives of their reminiscences, their reflections on the time they spent at Simmons. Upon graduation, the first class formed the Alumni Association. The very afternoon after their commencement, they formed the Alumni Association with the express purpose of maintaining connection to and continuing to support the university. The college as it was back then. And this is one of those iconic Simmons shots I had to share. In 1921, Simmons went through its first endowment campaign. And this was a process that engaged nearly all members of the Simmons community. Alums took to the streets of Boston in the little shop for wheels, which was kind of a salvage shop, if you will, of homemade goods, of goods they were reselling from that they'd owned, and there were also bake sales and pencil sales. Simmons students took to the streets of the business district of Boston and sold pencils to all of the businessmen, if you will, down around Post Office Square in Boston's financial district. Just a wonderful example of the Simmons community coming together for the advancement and betterment of the university. And in 1931, I wanted to share this shot as well. The first class held their 25th reunion. And for those of you from the class of, what would it be this year, 1996, who are celebrating a 25th reunion, obviously, your experience is much different from theirs. They're sitting on the vast back lawn of the MCB, but I hope that you are similarly experiencing the same sort of connection I'm sure these wonderful women had back in 1931, 90 years ago. And I mentioned the main college building, I mentioned the beautiful lawn behind it, and I wanted to step back a little bit in history and give everyone a shot of what the Fenway looked like in the days before Simmons College opened there. This is a shot from Mission Hill of the Fenway neighborhood. You can see the muddy river flowing over there into the Charles and whatnot. And for any of us who've walked around Mission Hill, Longwood Medical Area, the Fenway neighborhood, you see it has markedly changed. It's just been for 150 years, a tremendous transformation. Simmons's main college building was opened in 1904. The first class of students started in 1902, you'll remember. So most of their classes were offered at classrooms or office spaces that were rented from other schools or from businesses up near the Back Bay. But in 1904, the main college building was finally opened. It was almost ready for the first day of school. Students were stepping over, still had to, as they entered classes in September of 1904, still had to step over construction work that was going on. And for anyone who has been near the main college building over the past year, that's what's past is prologue, I guess, as we're currently undergoing some wonderful renovations and transformations of the main college building as well. Here we see Simmons College on the right and Mrs. Jack Gardner's Palace on the left. At the time, these were just about the only two buildings along the Fenway. And it was right around this time that Mrs. Gardner was beginning to open up her home, her palace, as she called it, to other members of society to look at her wonderful artwork collection. And over years, the Mrs. Jack's Palace has become the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and many generations of Simmons students and everyone, and many folks from Boston and beyond have visited and enjoyed that wonderful museum. A wonderful woodcut here. These were made for a calendar that the Bank of Boston did, or a series of ink blotters, rather. And this was about famous firsts in Boston. Earlier, I showed you the woodcut of Mr. Simmons. He was in there for being the first person to design a ready-made suit. This is here as the first women's college in the city of Boston, and this being a very iconic shot of the front of the main college building. And the MCB has certainly been an iconic, one of the greatest icons of Simmons over the past 100+ years. And I just want to share with you some photos that highlight sort of its iconic status. This would be students from shortly after it opened, approaching the MCB. This is just a shot of students commuting, if you will, along Brookline Avenue from some of the residence halls that they lived in. Going to the main campus building on what looks like a very snowy day, very familiar to today's students even. And finally, just one of my favorite shots from the archives from 1906, a student posed in front of the main college building from just across the muddy river. As I mentioned, there were small residence halls at the outset of Simmons College. Pilgrim House, Longwood House. I'm sure many of these names resonate with members of some of the older classes that are on this call. But Simmons's first dormitory, if you will, South Hall, opened in 1907, and the Colonnade and the Refrectory, which later became Bartol Hall, if you will, the dining commons, were sort of occupied beginning in 1907, so over 100 years of residence experience. Before that, students lived in small houses or sort of rented apartments, if you will, that the university procured and provided for them. And this is just another shot, if you will, to call back to the previous one of the MCB from across the muddy river. And the more things change, the more they stay the same. There were no trees in the previous one, but the MCB and its iconic cupola still stand. Now I want to take a quick turn to the academic programs at Simmons. As I mentioned, Mr. Simmons sort of identified a number of programs in his will that he thought would provide women the means to have independent livelihoods. And as I said, some panned out and some did not. This is an example of a classroom from the 1930s. How far we've come from in 90 years. I mean, our classrooms today, emphasize the opportunity for flexible group work. Chairs have wheels on them, and it's just tremendous when you think about the women of the 1930s learning in spaces like this. Household economics was a really important program at Simmons, a really important program for women in the 20th century. And I want to dispel the myth that it was all about cooking and cleaning and how to sew. These women were learning aspects of biology, of chemistry, and they were applying it all to household management. They were learning aspects of management principles and applying them to how to manage residential kitchens and or become dietitians even for school districts. This program evolved over time and now it has its roots, the nutrition program, the graduate nutrition program we have has its roots in the household economics program. Secretarial Studies is another early program of Simmons, one of the first that opened, and again, just a wonderful shot of women learning in what isn't necessarily a very dynamic environment, perhaps, but these women, I can't emphasize enough the preparation that the Secretarial Studies program provided to women to work in a professional capacity. They had to learn aspects of property law, of what we would now call human resources or personnel law. They took classes in contract writing in addition to shorthand and typing skills. These women also had to have fluency in, I believe, 2 foreign languages to allow for them to be very effective executive assistants to executives, to high-powered, to what would have then been businessmen, if you will. Simmons also developed a strong Department of English, which had very strong components in sort of publishing and printing, and this is an example of just that. The roots of this program now live on in both the English and the communications departments in the Eiffel College. And here we have more examples from of more modernized, if you will, business technologies that these women were using. Just a great shot here of the Simmons Library. We're currently undergoing renovations, but 100 years ago, we were positioned at the top floor of the main college building, what is now the Trustman Art Gallery. Libraries these days have filtered windows to keep out some of the UV light and protect the collections. I'm quite sure that the skylight here offered none of those protections. Just a wonderful random trivia fact for you. One of our library students from 1922, Mary Elizabeth Wood, went on to become the founder of modern librarianship in China. She was a missionary and brought some of the principles of information organization and access to China. I was actually lucky enough about 10 years ago to travel to China and present about Miss Wood's legacy to a major library conference in Beijing. The other aspect of Simmons' academic programs that has been tremendous over the years has been sort of the sciences. And I just have some photos here of students using various equipment in the chemistry and biology labs. And a lot of these programs still remain and are being relocated actually in the current renovations to a space in Lefevre Hall in the main college building for some wonderful, truly modern and great facilities. And much of this equipment you see here has actually found its way into the archives thanks to the mindful delivery of some of our wonderful faculty from the sciences. The last point I want to drive home, or one of the last points I think, is around the way that students engaged with the outside community. And here we have a photo of some public health nursing students doing what we now call field experiences or clinical internships. A really great program. I have some records in the archives of the letters from nurses who served on the front lines during the influenza pandemic of 1918. So clearly, Simmons students have consistently made a difference in the community. Here we have another nursing shop from the 1920s. And pinning ceremonies are wonderful, joyous occasions, and always have been and always will be, to recognize student nurses into the ranks of the academy. And I want to close out this talk around academics by highlighting the Simmons News, which was the first edition was released in 1923, and one of the most remarkable things about the Simmons newspaper that I want to highlight for you is that it was one of, if not the first student newspaper in the country that was fully managed by the students. There was no editorial interference from the administration, and that was a remarkable opportunity for the students to have a degree of agency and voice. Today's newspaper is called the Simmons Voice, and it's available online as a e-newspaper, if you will, a website. And this past year, they have won some significant national student journalism awards. So over almost 100 years of great reporting from the Simmons News. Close out with a couple shots of the auditorium. Some of you might remember this. The library from the 1970s. Those chairs just look absolutely fabulous, but when computers first arrived on campus in the late 70s and early 80s, some very dedicated faculty invested time into that. And all of this work, all of this academic work is all in the interest of getting students toward the point of commencement. Here we have the class president of 1956, Peggy Gray, on her commencement day. And I don't know the name of this alum, but I think even today, students jump up and click their heels to finally have received their diploma and to go out into the world as successful Simmons alums. I'm going to bounce over now to residence life and just offer, as I mentioned, the dorms opened in 1907 with South Hall, and there were many small houses along the way, which were used as practice houses for the household economics program. Here's an example of dorm life. There were a tremendous number of dormitory rules back in the day in terms of what you could wear on campus, when you could go sunbathing, which dorm roofs allowed for sunbathing, if you will. White gloves were required if you were to leave the campus, but I guess accordions were totally allowed. So there you have dorm life in the 1940s. Excuse me, an example of a dorm room from the 1950s. Friday tea in the dorms. I believe there was a reunion tea, which President Wooten hosted. And this is a great shot of a wonderful Simmons tradition for the students to gather in the dormitories for a Friday afternoon tea. Great shot of students relaxing. Everyone's doing something, playing cards, knitting, even smoking back in the 1950s. And this would have been from one of the lounges. Another shot of a lounge. I believe this is from the main college building's basement. And the patio was just reaching its end of days, if you will, when I started going to library school at Simmons, this wonderful expanse behind the main college building. It now hosts the college center, which opened in 2001. 2001, yes. So a wonderful gathering place the patio was for many generations of Simmons women. A very nice shot of the dining commons with the stone wall along its side, the fens we call it. And here's some shots of dorm life and how it's changed and how it hasn't over the years from the 1980s and later in the 2000s. And right here we see Java City, which is what the coffee shop on campus was called in the 2000s, hosted in the in the college center or on the patio, even if you want to think of it that way. Student activities have been a really big part of students' lives, obviously, over the years, and I'm going to do a quick tour through some highlights of that. In the early days, Simmons the shark was not the mascot of the college. That didn't come about until the 1990s. In the early days, each class elected its own mascot, and we have a wonderful collection in the archives, which I usually have on display. And one of my favorite is Clementine the elephant from the class of 1925. They also had all sorts of animals: owls, deer, turtles, cartoon characters as well, Little Lulu and some of the Seven Dwarfs. Freshman Frolic was just a bizarre student tradition, if you will. It was for the first year class before they moved up to be upperclassmen, to have their last chance at being juvenile, if you will. So it involved, as many traditions in the 1920s do, the 1920s and 30s, a bit of dress up and sort of play acting, very consistent with other women's colleges at the time. But they all dressed up like babies for their freshman frolics. The freshman junior wedding was a wonderful Simmons tradition where the freshman class played the role of the bride, and the junior class dressed in drag and served as the groomsman and his, if you will, party. These were designed to be ceremonies that connected the freshman and junior classes during their time at Simmons and beyond, and many great relationships, many great friendships came out of this linking of the freshman and junior classes. Most of these Simmons traditions died out in the 1940s or 50s. Here's an example of one which has transformed over the years. The Old English dinner was held around the holiday season as a medieval grog hall, if you will, and that's transformed over time into Winter Wonderland now, which is held or on the residence campus in the dining hall, where the president visits and has a dinner, if you will, a banquet with the students. Spring Spree, another really fun Simmons tradition, which merged up with track day over the years. Shot from 1916. You see the women are holding, I think, a Winnie the Pooh doll, which must have been the mascot of that year. And track day for the 1920s, and I know this is the 1920s because if you look down, you see Clementine the elephant right there. So clearly that's a member of the class of 1925 enjoying track day. Track day also had student faculty baseball games. There was archery, all sorts of fun competitions, the javelin throw and whatnot. That's evolved over time and has now become a form of Spring Spree, which has happened for many years. Here's a group students from the 1950s having fun. And in the 1980s, a pachyderm, a real live elephant, visited the residence campus for Spring Spree and some fun elephant rides, I guess. So I just want to point out that elephants have been a theme. And now we get to May Day, which is one of the longest ongoing Simmons traditions. I don't know if students did a May Day dance this past year because of the pandemic. I made certain to at least walk around a light pole on May Day, so I could say that at least Simmons has maintained that tradition, just so I don't have to change my script. The longest ongoing student tradition at Simmons started in 1914 and has continued on through the years in a variety of wonderful fashion. Speaking of fashion, as I said, students love to do dress up in the 30s and 40s. The May Queen and her court are here. Through the 1960s, every May 1st, the students would be woken up at the crack of dawn for a strawberry breakfast. And I want to point out here in the 1960s, there was actually a silent protest held during May Day to protest the termination of faculty contracts. And this is just a great example of students being engaged in Simmons in Simmons affairs and sort of caring about the delivery of the academic program over the years. This is well remembered by the students who attended this particular protest, the silent protest of May Day. And here we have students from about, God, I always think this was just yesterday, but in fact it was 22 years ago now, I guess, enjoying a May Day performance during the centennial year of Simmons. As I mentioned, students love to get out and be active. Here are some students at the tennis courts over on the Res campus. Likewise, golf was often played on the lawn behind the MCB as part of the phys ed requirements. Phys ed was a requirement at Simmons through, I believe, 1995. But everything wasn't organized. I mean, here we have students getting together just to build an old Simmons snowman on the Fenway during a winter month. Field hockey, fencing. Some students might remember the old gym in the basement of the MCB before it moved up into the third floor of the MCB. But fencing was offered back then, as you know, and in my collection, I have bows and arrows from gym class and field hockey, sticks and whatnot. Title IX in the 1970s opened up a lot of athletic opportunities for Simmons women, and the crew team has been a very visible and very successful academic athletic program. And yes, on occasion, students did leave the campus and going to dances at some of the various ballrooms and in Boston proper, and hotels were very popular for dances. And this is an example of a dance card where a Simmons alum wrote in with whom she would be dancing for each of the dances at this go around in 1934. We get a lot of dance cards, and they're really wonderful pieces of memorabilia. And it's been a Simmons tradition for 100 years, over 100 years, to maybe cut class and go to a baseball game. And here's some students in 1954 cheering on the Red Sox. And for many of the years of Simmons history, they didn't have a winning team, or at least a World Series champions to cheer for, but that's even turned around in recent years. And finally, just want to throw in the blizzard of 1978 to show that sometimes, even if you want to go out and have fun, weather dumps a tremendous amount of snow on you. And I worked at Simmons during Snowmageddon a few years ago. Many of us remember that as potently as those who suffered through the blizzard of 78 remember it. And it looks like I'm going to take the last 10 or so minutes and talk about some student engagement, and then I'll open the floor up to some questions. I had to check the time. Like I said, students have always been interested in the world beyond 300 the Fenway, beyond the Res campus, and all members of the Simmons community pitched in tremendously to assist in the war effort back in World War II. Through raising money, through collecting scrap metal, through making bandages for the soldiers. It was a nationwide, and also at Simmons, it was a wonderful unification point of national unity. Eleanor Roosevelt visited Simmons in 1958. She was talking about some of her vision for the future. Here's a wonderful photo of her sitting with President Park. And one can't discuss student engagement without talking about the largely student-led protests in response to the Vietnam War. And here are some students gathered outside on Brookline Avenue with some Simmons students as well as some other college students. Simmons students spoke out often and frequently, as did faculty members, against the war in Vietnam. At the same time that the Vietnam War protests were rolling the country, the civil rights movement was also very active. A Simmons student was arrested for a lunch counter sit-in. She went down south in 1965, and shortly thereafter, the Simmons Civil Rights Club was founded. Over the intervening few years, it transformed into the Black Student Organization, which was one of the most active student organizations. It has been one of the most active student organizations since its founding. It still is is very present today. In 1969, the BSO presented 10 demands to the President Park, identifying sort of curricular changes, personnel changes, access to additional resources that were necessary to create a more equitable and equal experience for all students at Simmons. The 10 demands of 1969 were, of course, referenced when students released their later 10 demands in the past 5 or 7 years, and the college responded to both sets of demands in a variety of ways, including in '69 the establishment of the Black Studies program. The Black Studies department and program started in 1972, largely driven by sort of student demands and protest and expectations. The BSO also established Our Little Black Book, which has been published for most years since 1974. It's an annual celebration of the Black student community at Simmons, and it serves as a yearbook, if you will, for them. And some wonderful faculty advisors worked with the BSO on Our Little Black Book and all of their other programming. Another way that Simmons students remained connected to the world was through inviting prominent speakers to campus. You saw Eleanor Roosevelt earlier. We also had Malcolm X, Shirley Chisholm. This is a photo of Jane Fonda and her husband at the time, Tom Hayden, speaking with President Holmes watching on. Nikki Giovanni has been at the Simmons, Alice Walker. I mean, a remarkable list of very big names. And even today, we're very fortunate. This past year, Dr. Ibram Kendi came and spoke about his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, gave a virtual program that was very well received by the community. So it's been a constant theme at Simmons of trying to bring the outside world into 300 the Fenway to sort of advance and continue some important conversations. Continuing conversations, and advancing issues that are very important to Simmons is another thing I want to touch on here. In the 1980s, when women's right to choose was under assault at the time, as it unfortunately still is today. Simmons students coordinated through the Women's Center at Simmons, and would bus students down to the National March on Washington in '89. The Gay and Lesbian Alliance, GALA, grew in the 1980s out of student groups from the 1970s to sort of appreciate the contributions that the gay and lesbian community were making to the campus. And this being Pride Month, I think it's very important to recognize Simmons was, in the 1970s, very much a leader in recognizing the diversity in that regards. And also, students drove significant change, and that's another thing I want everyone to leave here knowing is that in the 1980s, Simmons students did an education campaign on campus, assisted by some wonderful faculty, to educate the campus community around the apartheid in South Africa, the apartheid regime in South Africa, and work to divest Simmons's holdings from companies which were supportive of that particular racist regime. And they led an education campaign, educating everyone from students on the ground all the way to the members of the Board of Trustees, and resulted in sort of divestment of Simmons's investments in companies which supported apartheid. Just a remarkable example of change happening at all levels. And finally, I wanted to conclude my talk, open it up to questions, but first I had to reference Betsy's friends. For anyone here from the class of 1971, you all know and love Betsy McCandless, who was murdered by her husband in 1992. members of the class of 71 gathered together to found the Betsy McCandless Fund, which provided for funding for Betsy's Friends, a peer education group which is focused on healthy relationships and building awareness around the issue of domestic violence. And they've held the Clothesline Project for many, many years on campus, I believe going on 25 when we come back in the fall. And it's a very hard but very important event. And I want to express my condolences to any member of the class of 71 and also thank them for keeping Betsy's memory alive in such a potent and significant way. And with that, I'm going to conclude my part of the talk. I will stop sharing, but I do want to encourage everyone to visit the archives for exhibits. We have digitized fully digitized collections of student newspapers through, I believe, 1975 at this point are up, as well as fully digitized collections of student yearbooks. We have some great exhibits focusing on the history of the various presidents of Simmons. You can learn more about the mascots of each class. Sports at Simmons is another exhibit. We have a wonderful exhibit on activism at Simmons and a really great thoughtful exhibit around the conversations that happened around the black, so the experience of black students at Simmons from the first black student in 1914 through the present day. So I'm going to pop links to all these into the chat once I close this particular window. And now I'm going to stop sharing and invite anyone to ask me a question.